Oh man, Bradley, I don't know how you were going to finish top 24 next year following up this year's performance with rankings like these. Alvin Kamara number 11, Austin Eckler 15. I don't understand where you're coming from.
Jake, why do you hate old pass catching running backs? I think that's the key for us here is to be taking advantage of and buying low on these pass catching running backs. Yes, it's Alvin Kamara, it's Austin Eckler, but we have to acknowledge that Eckler was dealing with some sort of injury during the season. We have to admit that he was dealing with something, and pretty much all of the Chargers offense was dealing with something. Justin Herbert with the broken finger that cost him a few games. You have Mike Williams out the majority of the season. Keenan Allen missed the last few games. This entire Chargers offense, I think we just need to throw out most of the second half of the season where they were just not themselves. And so I'm back in on Austin Eckler as a top 15 running back for next year. His pass catching is still there. The efficiency metrics sure are pretty low, but I think that does bounce back some either with the Chargers or some other team is going to see what usefulness as a change of pace back or his potential as a pass catcher. Teams are always looking for that role of I need a third down back. I need a change of pace back, and especially a trusted producer, a veteran producer. I think Austin Eckler still finds a place, even if he's not re-signed in LA. And then Alvin Kamara, he was just dealing with injuries at the end of the season as well, but the pass catching is still there. He was the offense outside of Chris Olave for the New Orleans Saints. So I think that these running backs are going to get discounted. And the reason why I put them up in my rankings is because I anticipate that they're going to be lower based on the expert consensus on Fantasy Pros. I'm 3 spots ahead on Kamara. And I think it's egregious. The expert consensus has Austin Eckler at running back 30. He still hit some major upside weeks from this past season. And with the Chargers offense back and probably getting a good pick in the first round, and this team touchdown regression is bound to happen with Austin Eckler only scoring 6 this year on what was that 230 touches. We're going to see more touchdowns for Austin Eckler. We're going to see Alvin Kamara still be useful in this offense. So I think that the fear that they're falling off is preserved by their pass catching. So I want them as top 15 running backs this year in 2024.
Yeah, so I'm going to start by disagreeing with you, and let's go point by point and person by person. I'm going to start with Alvin Kamara. We take a look at how that running game and how that offensive kind of worked in when they found their most success. You look at the emergence of Keandre Miller coming on last week of the year, who was also dealing with injuries all year, who I think is going to partially eat up some of Alvin Kamara's touches in carries and be that change of pace back that the Saints are looking for. You got a guy who's a lot younger than Alvin Kamara, who has a quicker burst and a little bit more speed than Kamara does at this point of his career, and has taken a lot less hits than Alvin Kamara has. So I think Keandre Miller is going to eat into the touches of Alvin Kamara, knocking him down a little bit. So I think running back 11 and being an RB1 is a little bit high for him. I see him as a mid-tier RB2, probably around that 18 to 20 range going into next year. So I don't think you're a million miles apart in terms of against consensus, but I don't think he has that running back 1 upside, especially with Jamal Williams still there, especially with Keandre Miller coming on strong towards the end and having a great week 17 and 18.
Then yeah, so the Alvin Kamara, I agree with you. I love Kendre Miller. I think he's definitely a sneaky play that we want to be in on, because I think both you and I aren't really impressed with Jamal Williams, right? I think he's going to have his role as like a plotter.
If he's outside the 1, he's not scoring. That's pretty much it.
And so I agree with you. I think Kendre Miller is one of those players that I will love clicking later in the rounds, because I still think that Alvin Kamara is going to be the lead back. I think you would agree too that he's probably still going to be the lead back, but Kendre, even if he's more involved, we saw early in Kamara's career, 120 rush attempts. Kamara still finishes as the running back 4 in fantasy points per game. Jake, do you know what Alvin Kamara finished as the running back points per game finisher this year?
Off the top of my head, no, I would have to look it up.
He finished as running back 3 in fantasy points per game. So for him to fall to 11, I think that's a fair drop for what because he was running back 13 2 years ago. So I think falling a little bit is fine. And I do agree with you. He's on the wrong side of the age curve. And Kendry Miller is definitely a great pickup. So I think that we're in agreement on Kendry Miller, maybe just a little bit of haggling over the spot for where Alvin Kamara is. But give me your reasons for hating Austin Eckler.
Yeah, as someone who was very, very high on Austin Eckler, needless to say, I was disappointed this year. But what I will say is I don't think the Chargers bring Austin Eckler back. And I don't think he still has it in him to be a running back 1A. And I don't think he has it in him to produce at a very high level. I think he's going to be very, very touchdown dependent next year. When you look at his game log from this year, he had one game over 100 yards rushing. That's it. Just one. Other than that, you're looking at he only went over 60 yards rushing 1, 2, 3 times all year, or 3 other times all year. Receiving wise, he never topped 50 yards more than once. Now, granted, he had a couple games that were pretty close, but he's just not the same back that he was last year, 2 years ago, 3 years ago. He's a completely different back, and I think it's going to depend on A, where he lands, and B, how efficient is that offense. If they can get it down to the goal line, yeah, I think he does have some value, but I don't think he's going to have as much value between the 20s.
Yeah, and that really was the thing for Austin Eckler in previous seasons. He was able to convert the touchdowns. He was able to run effectively between the tackles. This year, though, in true yards per carry, 3.3 true yards per carry. That was 62nd among running backs. But last year, he wasn't super efficient either. He was 34th at 4.2 true yards per carry. I think that there's a lot of things that happened with this team, with the Chargers. And I think, honestly, like they gave up a little bit at the end of the season. They weren't playing for anything. Justin Herbert was out. And so it's definitely possible that Austin Eckler does not re-sign. The Chargers were hesitant to give him a raise anyways. If you remember in the offseason, he was threatening on holding out and saying, I'm not going to play for you. So I could see that very much being the pathway for the Chargers being like, all right, you hardballed us. We gave you a raise and you didn't do much for us this year. So I could definitely see them saying you can have good luck finding somewhere else.
Yeah, I don't think the Chargers want him back. I think that's why you weren't seeing him playing as much later on in the year. They were trying to figure out what they had in guys like Kelly, Isaiah Spiller, that sort of thing. So I think that the Chargers probably will move on from Austin Eckler or sign him to another 1 year deal. But I think odds are he resigns somewhere else, maybe say like Baltimore or even like a Denver, and then goes in there and tries to produce, again, following along the career path of Melvin Gordon, signing over in Denver and then bouncing around the league a little bit.
See, I was thinking it's actually Alvin Kamara who would go to Denver with the Sean Payton ties. And you could see Alvin Kamara have a career renaissance under head coach Sean Payton. That's very much a possibility.
If that's the case, I think you might be a little bit closer to in terms of where you have Kamara ranked if he does find his way over to Denver. But we'll have to see what happens there.
Now, to put some context to this, the Chargers were dead last in the NFL in PFF run block grade. So yes, Eckler was really bad this year, true yards per carry, but he was done no favors by his offensive line in terms of run blocking. The entire offensive line got a 40.1 PFF run block grade, just absolutely disastrous. Compare that to, like, we were talking Denver Broncos. They were at 72.3. That was fourth best in the NFL. So moving on is probably in Austin Eckler's best interest if the Chargers don't address the offensive line. And the Chargers may look at this and say, you know what? The issue may not be with our offensive line. The issue may be with Austin Eckler, who, like, in game film just looked slow. He was moving a lot slower. There was the one game where it looked like he was moving like 13 miles an hour, just really slow along along the sideline. And that was, I think, the pivot point for many of us changing our minds on Austin Eckler. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. I think that game was actually against the Packers.
Go Pack Go.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, they looked great today. But
They did. We're recording this Sunday, January 14th, and the Green Bay Packers have upset the number 2 seed Dallas Cowboys. What was the final score? It was like 48-32.
32?
Yeah, they
Something
scored.
like that.
There were 80 points in this game, and 48 of them were scored by the Green Bay Packers. Yeah, go Pack Go. Both Jake and I, Packers fans. Speaking of the Packers, it's going to be interesting to rank Aaron Jones next year. He just had 3 touchdowns in this game against the Dallas Cowboys. He's either a free agent or could get cut this next year. AJ Dillon has certainly worn out his welcome in the Packers. I have Jones right now at about running back 25 in my way too early rankings. He is behind Tony Pollard, behind James Conner, behind Brian Robinson, but ahead of Najee Harris, ahead of Ramondre Stevenson, and ahead of Javonte Williams. Where's the right spot for Aaron Jones? Is it at that back end running back 2? Or should we have more optimism about Jones entering 2024, given his performance against the Dallas Cowboys?
Yeah, Jones has always been someone that's very, very difficult for me to rank because he can either be a very, very, very good player or have weeks where he looks absolute garbage. And a lot of that has to do with the Packers offense either being really good or really bad. So there's that. But Aaron Jones coming into next year, he is signed for 2024. He does have a $12 million dead cap hit, so the Packers can release
Probably
him
not moving
relatively cheaply. But yeah, and I mean his cap hit, even if they kept him, was only 17 million. So it's not like he's making the most money on the Packers or anything like that. But they do have to, I believe they're talking about re-signing Jordan Love and, figuring that out. And he looked really good. But yeah, I've always had issues ranking Aaron Jones just because he's so polarizing. But I think one thing that we have to remember right here too is he missed 11 games this year. So the last 4 weeks of the year, when everybody else is a little bit run down, he has been able to be fresh. If you factor that in, how is that going to affect him versus everybody else if he has a full season? Or sorry, he played 11 games. He didn't miss 11 games this year. But even still, being able to be fresh going into the last 4 weeks of the year and into this playoff run is going to do wonders for him. He's either going to re-sign in Green Bay or he's going to go somewhere else at the Packers cut and have a real chance to be a legitimate every down running back for a team next year. So I'd probably bump him up a little bit in the rankings. I'd probably have him right around where you have Brian Robinson, David Montgomery, around that 2019 range. So I don't think you're too far off on him, but I do think he will have a better year next year than guys like Pollard and Connor and Henry, whose situations are a little bit more murky and don't know really where they're going to play next year.
Yeah, I think part of the ranking too is keeping in mind that he missed those games for a reason. He has a history of soft tissue issues, and he is 29 years old. He will be 30 years old by the end of next season. A guy who is super dynamic, an elite level burst score and agility score. And that's even for a player that is his age, but running back 26 in fantasy points per game this year, entering the playoffs. But if AJ Dillon is moved on from, or if the Packers say, you know what, we want to use Jones in a different role and just say AJ Dillon change a pace back, we know that Aaron Jones can access RB1 overall on a week, just like we saw here in the playoffs, but also in week 1 against Chicago, he only played 47% of snaps, 9 carries, 2 receptions, 127 total yards, and 2 touchdowns. That is, he can access the RB1 overall on a week with limited touches. So this is a player that I think we need to move up in the best ball streets, but in the season long rankings is a little bit harder to get him into that top 12, that top 15 or so. I think that's what's difficult for me, given his history of injuries and especially the soft tissue ones at his age.
Yeah, I completely agree. And again, that's another reason why I have such a hard time ranking Aaron Jones is because he has all the potential in the world to dominate week in, week out. But like you said, with those soft tissue injuries, it makes him incredibly polarizing in terms of whether or not you want to play him. Depending on what the Packers do, if they bring him back, I do think that increases his stock just because I do think they will be moving on from A.J. Dillon. And this running back class isn't the strongest class in the world coming in 2024 either. So I think that they have a chance to he has a chance to really take over that backfield and primarily be the lead ball carrier in that backfield if he does stay in Green Bay.
Now, a player that we know is going to move on is Derrick Henry. He already said his farewell speech. He's said goodbye to the people of Tennessee. Finishes RB 16 in fantasy points per game this year. I have him at 23. Consensus has him at 21. I just don't know where he's going to land that's going to make the impact that we want. Like maybe it's Baltimore. If J.K. Dobbins is not the right fit, maybe it's Dallas. If the Cowboys decide to move on from Tony Pollard. But this is a player who, you know, in 2022 had almost 400 receiving yards. This year, 214. But still 12 and 13 touchdowns. He is a touchdown monster, a touchdown machine. 4.2 yards per carry, still not too bad. And so I still think he has something left in the tank, just not super efficient. So he's going to need the volume. And I don't know how many teams are willing to give him the rushing volume that's able to get him into and maintain that top 15, top 18 running back into that age 30 season.
Yeah, I think Dallas would honestly be a great fit for him. I think going over there and playing in that offense where he only has to play one playoff game every single year, and then he can take the rest of the year off.
Phenomenal, Jake.
Seems like it would be a great fit. But and if you look at his carries by year, you're looking at 280, 349, 219, 378, 303, 215. And that's just in the last 6 years. So he's had over 2,000 attempts in his career, and that is a lot of hits to take as a running back. Granted, Derrick Henry's a different monster and a different animal just based off his size alone. And so he can probably last that long a lot better than a lot of other running backs in the NFL. But at what point does Father Time ultimately win, and we really see a huge drop off in his efficiency metrics?
Yeah, a couple efficiency metrics that still look good for Derrick Henry. He was number 2 among running backs in breakaway runs and number 8 in breakaway run rate and 9 in evaded tackles. So he was not taking a lot of big hits and he was getting some big plays. So those are still within his repertoire. It reminds me of a Saquon Barkley. And maybe I am a little too high on Saquon. I have Saquon at running back 9. But it feels like Saquon Barkley, where Barkley has the big playability, but aside from that, is not able to be an effective runner. Henry, 41st among all running backs in true yards per carry, 38th in yards per touch. So it's either boom or bust for Derrick Henry. That's what we felt like. And if he's not returning, Jake, how high does Tazi Spears rise? Because right now Tazi Spears is running back 26 in the consensus rankings, but I have him down at 35, and I have some concerns that Tazi Spears is not going to be the bell cow back for the Tennessee Titans. I think that they are in the mix to bring in one of these veteran running backs to split carries or split touches with Tazi Spears. Spears is a very efficient running back, but he doesn't have any ACLs, you know, like, sorry, his burst score is phenomenal, 91st percentile, but he's not a super speed guy. He is super efficient. We talk about true yards per carry, 26, yards per touch, 6, juke rate was 4th, breakaway run rate was 5th, and this 27th in breakaway runs in limited capacity and 11th in yards per route run. So he's a very efficient third down, change of pace type of back. But I'm not confident that Tazi Spears is going to be the 18 carries and 5 receptions per game running back that some people are trying to project him to be in this 2024 Tennessee offense.
Yeah, I don't think that Tajay Spears is going to be able to handle the role of a every down, 3 down workhorse back. I just think he's a little bit too small. I mean, 10, 200 pounds. Is that going to be big enough to handle hits from 300-pound, 350-pound linemen week in, week out? I personally don't think so. I know he's more of a field stretcher where he'd rather get east and west rather than run the ball north and south. Get out and use his speed and use his agility to be able to make plays. But I just don't see him being able to last a full season if he has to carry the load every single game for a 17-game season in that offense. I think you're right. I think they do bring someone in. I think he is a great change of pace back. A little bit bigger, but I think someone who really is similar is Darren Sproles. Sort of someone who can get out on the edge, make the play, but isn't quite big enough to handle that full every down sort of back role.
Yeah, I'm looking here and seeing who could be that type of back, and I was like, oh, Derrick Henry would be perfect. Like, it's sad that the Tennessee Titans would probably move on from him because I think that would be a good fit for the Tennessee. Like, that's what they're looking for. They need a thunder and lightning type of duo, and that's how Spears and Henry were being used for the majority of the season. Zeke was signed to a 1-year deal. I could see Ezekiel Elliott being that type of back where, they just need someone who can protect the quarterback and who is reliable and does not need to be super efficient, because the efficiency is going to come from Tajay Spears. You just need a guy who's going to protect your Will Levis, protect his blind side, because Zeke is one of the best pass blockers in the NFL. And that might be someone who could fit. Maybe it's Josh Jacobs if the Raiders decide to move on from Jacobs. Maybe it's Saquon as a big boom type of guy. Maybe it's Saquon to go to Tennessee. We'll see.
To me personally, I think that the firing of Mike Vrabel signals full-on rebuild. And I think they have a young quarterback in Will Levis. They have Derrick Henry going away. They traded Kevin Byard to the Eagles during the middle of the season. So it seems like they're on the path to want to rebuild. So I don't necessarily know that they're going to bring in a Zeke, a Barkley, or a bigger name free agent in the running game. I think they might try to take their chances on someone and draft someone like a Blake Corum and get someone a little bit higher in the draft and see if they can develop him into being an every down sort of back.
Yeah, that's possible. Attacking it in the draft is a pathway for certain. I only have one rookie ranked in my top 36 for right now in terms of running back, and that's Jonathan Brooks. I have him at 29. In most mock drafts right now, he's one of the highest drafted running backs, and maybe we'll see if others emerge in the combine, in the Senior Bowl, in other places. Like Tajay Spears started to gain some notoriety at the Senior Bowl last year. But, for right now, Jonathan Brooks is the rookie that I have in my top 36. Looking at a couple other players, though, Zamir White is one that I'm monitoring because he could be either a huge value, because we saw him really reel off some major weeks for fantasy near the end with Josh Jacobs dealing with some injuries. But I think a lot hinges on what happens. I don't think Zamir White himself has earned this role unless Antonio Pierce returns and Josh Jacobs does not. We're going to see what happens with Zamir White, but I think his value is very in flux this offseason.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think there's a very, very high likelihood that the Raiders do bring back Antonio Pierce after, especially what happened with Rich Bisaccia and how much the players wanted him to come back. And Mark Davis said no. So I think that he won't make that same mistake twice where his players really want someone to stay and then he decides to go a different route. So I'd be very surprised if Antonio Pierce wasn't named the head coach of the Las Vegas Raiders pretty soon here. But to your point, Zamir White played well in the fantasy playoffs and towards the latter half of the season. He was a great player when Josh Jacobs was out. So what the Raiders decide to do with Jacobs is going to 100% be in line with how valuable Zamir White will be. I think there is a chance that the Raiders bring him back. I don't know if Jacobs wants to go anywhere, but if he does, then I think that the Zamir White could be a mid-tier RB2 for this upcoming year.
Yeah, the volume, the pass catching, the big plays, all of that can factor in. One player that may be very influenced by his head coach or prospective head coach, Antonio Pierce. Yes, he is the favorite to return to the Vegas Raiders, but that's not a done deal. Other teams have looked at Antonio Pierce, like the Tennessee Titans and the Atlanta Falcons. If Antonio Pierce goes to Atlanta Falcons, talk me out of Bijan Robinson at the 101.
Hold on there. McCaffrey is still in play. Let's dial it back a notch. That guy just set a bunch of records this year, and he's the RB1 until proven otherwise. And then you also got a guy like Breece Hall, who's came off a torn ACL this year, absolutely lit it up, had over 1,500 yards in a piss-poor offense, and really excelled. And I think you saw it towards the latter half of the year, just how good this guy could be. To have nearly 1,000 yards rushing after tearing your ACL last year is phenomenal. I think that a whole off season of him being healthy and being able to make cuts and practice with the team is going to do wonders for him. Getting Aaron Rodgers back so he's not facing 7, 8, 9-man boxes is going to do wonders for him as well. I think I still have Breece Hall closer to the 101 than Bijan Robinson, but I do both of those, especially if Antonio Pierce goes to the Falcons.
Yeah, I have Breece Hall as my second running back in the rankings. You can go to fantasyfootballplusnetwork.com, go to rankings, and you can find my rankings there. Jake Brandt and Jake Fabian will be getting their rankings up there very shortly. So we'll be getting those up, and you can compare, you can contrast, you can make your decisions. But you mentioned the New York Jets getting Aaron Rodgers back as a possibility for optimism for Breece Hall. I think Hall, even if it was some other quarterback, I think it's Hall still. The Jets made it very clear that it's Hall and no one else, really. It's Breece Hall and then Izzy Abanikanda, right? The reality is the Jets got rid of Dalvin Cook. The Jets got rid of Michael Carter in the middle of the season. And so for a team that had the 6th worst PFF graded run blocking, I think the major move here is to address the offensive line with their first round pick. Because remember, the second round pick goes to the Green Bay Packers.
Exactly.
So I think that the big move for the Jets is to address the offensive line this offseason.
Yeah, I think so too. And they're getting healthier too, if you look at it, right? They're going to have Elijah Vera Tucker coming back, which will definitely help. And then just overall improving that offensive line is going to be one of their biggest needs going into this offseason. And I can't see him not making a move, especially with all the money and everything they invested in Aaron Rodgers. You're going to want to make sure he's standing on his 2 feet. He is getting a little bit older, so you're going to have some mobility questions there. So making sure he keeps the pocket a little bit cleaner for him. I wouldn't be surprised to see them go back to the well and have them bring back another one of Aaron Rodgers' favorite friends in David Bakhtiari, address that left tackle need there too. So I think there's a couple moves the Jets are going to make, which is going to significantly help Breece Hall.
A player that I'm a lot higher on than the consensus, and Jake, I'd love your take on this too, is DeAndre Swift. Jake Fabian and I got into it a little bit over DeAndre Swift because DeAndre Swift is probably on his way out in Philly. And if anyone signs him as a free agent, the Eagles get a compensatory 4th round pick, which is what they ended up trading for the Lions for Swift anyways. But I am always a sucker for these athletic, high spike week, high juke rate, elusive running backs who can catch the ball out of the backfield. And even if he lands on a loser team, he could get the volume where it's access to top 5 weeks, top 7 weeks, top 10 weeks. And if anything, I think the Philadelphia Eagles were limiting his pass catching in that offense. Is Jalen Hurts running the ball or throwing downfield. He's not looking to check it down very often. So a 10% target share in that type of offense, I thought was pretty impressive. I have DeAndre Swift at running back 16 in my way too early. I just like taking bets on these types of guys. How are you approaching a DeAndre Swift where he's probably going to be a high-end running back too, but we don't know what his future is going to be like?
Yeah, DeAndre Swift's a guy. I think it depends on the format that I'm playing, right? I'm a lot more likely to draft DeAndre Swift in a best ball situation than I am in a just normal redraft situation. And the reason for that is I think that you're right. He does have access to spike weeks, but knowing when those are going to come is a completely different thing. He was a guy in Philadelphia this year, but the fact that he couldn't make it work on his second team now, and you saw his carries start to be reduced towards the latter half of the year, and that's concerning to me. The fact that he's hasn't been able to stick on two teams in 4 seasons in the NFL. So I think there's a little bit of a question mark there, and that's partially what's giving me pause on fully attacking DeAndre Swift, but also needing to see where he lands too if he does decide to move on from the Eagles, because that is going to be a huge factor.
Yeah, Swift this year, a 3.1% rate of running back 1 weeks. That is scoring 23 fantasy points and half point or more. Swift, 9.3% of the time was at least 18 and a half. And then 30% of the time was at 12 and a half. So between that 18 and 12 and a half. So 42% of the time, DeAndre Swift got at least 12 and a half fantasy points for you and a half PPR. That was good for running back 28 on the season. And his best ball value rating, you talk about better in a best ball situation, he's running back 26 in best ball value rating this season, behind the likes of a Brian Robinson, behind the likes of Kenneth Walker and James Conner. So those there, we did see DeAndre Swift maybe mellow out a little bit, but the athleticism is just so tantalizing for me. This is a back to the well, and maybe I'm too stupid to quit type of person, but nevertheless, I think that Swift still belongs in that high to mid running back 2 spot.
Yeah, we all have one of those guys, right? For me, it's going to be Aaron Jones, and I'm going to be drafting Aaron Jones until his legs fall off or he retires, whichever one happens first. But yeah, I think that there is certainly a case to be made for DeAndre Swift. Would I have him as high as RB16? Probably not. But I think he's definitely in the conversation of being drafted in the mid rounds for fantasy purposes.
Okay, Jake, we've gotta rip off the Band-Aid here, because yesterday we had a game in Kansas City where Devon Achane and Raheem Mostert combined for, I don't know, it was like nothing. They did nothing. But I have a lot of optimism about Devon Achane and Raheem Mostert. In my way too early rankings, I was talking with Jake Fabian about this, and he had Raheem Mostert down at like 90th overall or 70th overall, and I had Mostert at, I don't know, it was like 48th, end of round 4, somewhere in 5th round. I wasn't willing to just be completely out on Raheem Mostert, because we saw what Mostert did this year. He was 3rd in best ball value rating. 28% of the time he was a running back 1. 67% of the time, 2/3 of his weeks, he was giving you at least a flex option. And I want to be betting on these Miami Dolphins running backs. I think that was the bet going into this season, was Jeff Wilson, Devon Achane, and Raheem Mostert. And it was clearly just Achane and Mostert given Wilson's injury. I'm very bullish on Achane as well, because Achane was running back 4 in best ball value rating. But like, how low is too low for Raheem Mostert?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question. I was on the wrong side of the Miami backfield this year. I was very high on Jeff Wilson. I think I had over 50% of them in best balls. Yeah, that hurt. But in terms
The right process, wrong result, right?
Yeah, exactly. I knew one of them was going to go. I just didn't know which one. But in terms of Devon Achane, we talked similarly about a guy, Tajay Spears, in him not being big enough to take those hits every single game. Devon Achane is an inch smaller and 2 pounds lighter than Tajay Spears. He's smaller than him. And if we don't think that if Tajay Spears is big enough to handle an every single down workload, how are we going to say that Devon Achane is big enough to handle an every single down workload? Now, don't get me wrong. Devon Achane still has both of his ACLs, so that's a win.
That's 2 pluses.
Yeah, exactly. But at the same time, is he going to be able to be a 20 to 30 carry back in the NFL game in, game out? Absolutely not. And so coming into this year, I think I probably have Devon Achane a little bit lower than you would in terms of overall ranking. I know you have him here at RB5. I probably have him down around the 12, 13, 14 range. But Raheem Mostert, there's going to be a role for that sort of back in Miami, someone who's going to handle that first, second down work and get a lot of those goal line touches, similarly to a Jamal Williams in the past. So I don't think he is 90th overall. I think he's a lot higher than that. But do I see him losing a little bit more of his touches as his efficiency goes down? And yeah, what is he, 31 going on 32 years old? So he is getting a little bit older in age.
He's not a young pup.
No, exactly. Ultimately, Father Time is going to catch up with them, and he is going to lose a step, which I do think opens up a little bit of a gateway for Devon Achane. But I still think Mosert's value is still there going into next year.
Yeah, I like if we're gonna get 7th, 8th round Mostert, I think I'm still in on that, given the role. But I agree with you. There's going to be some other running back that's going to be the number 2 along with Achane. I agree with you. There's going to be value in multiple running backs in this Miami backfield. So whether we're back in on taking last round Jeff Wilson or we're just drafting more Raheem Mostert, whatever the case may be, I think that's the right process, is to attack these high scoring offenses with a little bit of ambiguity. So we can tie in then to the game that's happening as we're speaking. The Detroit Lions have both Jahmyr Gibbs, who I have at running back 4, and David Montgomery, who I have at running back 19. Gibbs and Monty finished at running back 7 and 8 in best ball value rating this year. And their variance rating was very close to 0. It was Monty's was at more at 18%, but Gibbs was at 6 or 7%. And that indicates that they were not necessarily handcuffs, that they were producing without much variance, which is key. So they were scoring a lot and scoring without a lot of variance and with more consistency. So I have Gibbs at 4 and Monty down at 19, I think I said. And so maybe I'm a little low on Montgomery, but both of those backs I think are going to be once again fantasy viable for the Detroit Lions in 2024.
Absolutely. I don't think there is any reason to doubt that they are going to be unplayable at any point in time for next year, especially we've seen Dan Campbell's philosophy. He likes to get the ball when they're down at the goal line in his running back's hands. And Monty being a bigger back, he's not going anywhere. Even if he goes into that Jamal Williams role from 2 years ago where he was getting 1-yard touchdowns, 2-yard touchdowns, and that's about it, he's still going to be very, very viable as a running back for fantasy football. And same thing with Gibbs. You see his athleticism. You see his explosion. All the tools are there for him to be an absolute star in Detroit, and I don't think that's going away anytime soon either.
All right, we got to talk about a player that I am 9 spots ahead of consensus, and that's Brian Robinson, who came on pretty strong this year. In fact, Brian Robinson and Bijan Robinson were right next to each other in terms of best ball value rating, but Brian Robinson had a pretty high variance, 39%. He had a couple major spike weeks, including running back 1 overall finishes in some weeks because of the usage in the passing game that we had not seen last season. So this year in 2023, 36 receptions, 367 yards. Last year, only 9 receptions, 60 receiving yards. Robinson finished at running back 22, but he was the running back 1 overall in week 10 against Seattle on only 51% of snaps and the running back won week 2 against Denver on 51% of snaps. So this is a player that we've seen some major spike weeks from, but my concern is that there's a new offense that's going to be implemented here in Washington. Ron Rivera's already out. Sam Howell's not guaranteed his job as the quarterback. There's been some chatter about the Bears situation, trading the number 1 pick. I think a natural trade partner, if they're looking to stick with Justin Fields, is the Washington Commanders. They only move down 1 spot, and they can accumulate a little bit more. And Washington is going to look for their quarterback of the future. Caleb Williams is a Washington guy. This is very much a big market possibility. And the Washington Commanders have been looking for a quarterback for a long time. And so with that new offense, how are you approaching this ambiguity that Brian Robinson, who was the lead back for the last 2 years since he had been drafted, 3rd round pick out of Alabama, he's had shifts in roles. He was loved by the coaching staff, but we anticipate a new coaching staff. So how nervous are you to draft a Brian Robinson type of player whose majority of work was received through the volume, the carries?
Yeah, I think there's one big thing that no one's really talking about right now, and that's Eric Bieniemy. I think he is the key component as to whether or not Brian Robinson kind of duplicates his success next year. And the reason for that is you look at what Jerick McKinnon did. You look at what even a guy like CEH did back when he was a rookie. And then you look at what a guy Isaiah Pacheco did coming out of the backfield in Kansas City when Eric Bieniemy was there. And then you look at what a guy like Brian Robinson did, and they follow the same path. So I think it'll be very interesting to see. I can't see a different head coach wanting to get rid of Bieniemy. I just can't see it. He's one of the best offensive minds in football. How he's not a head coach, that's a different topic for a different day, but I do not know.
Maybe he becomes the head coach of Washington, but
he could be, but if he stays there, I think there is a lot to be optimistic about in regards to Brian Robinson. I think he, like you said, he had a couple of PPR or half-point PPR overall number 1 running back fantasy finishes. And to go along with that, he had quite a few games where he was an RB3, borderline RB1, RB2 running back as well. There is plenty of optimism for him to be there. Another year in that same system would do him a lot of good if they keep Bieniemy. So I think he is the key component to determining Brian Robinson's value moving forward.
I also think an important point is that Washington may be in the market for looking for a different running back. Antonio Gibson is a free agent in 2024, an unrestricted free agent. And so I think that if Brian Robinson continues to get his volume, this could be a running back that can give you top 18, top 15. And if he's being valued at almost running back 30, that's an auto smash at that point. Like, just draft wide receivers early and take some Brian Robinson. Like, we're talking about values here. Just be a little disciplined in your drafting and wait for a guy like Brian Robinson, who has earned carries in the past, who has shown high-level elite production from a fantasy perspective. No, he's never going to be the bastion of efficiency. Like, his efficiency metrics, he's 35th in true yards per carry. But last year, 15th in yards per touch, 19th in juke rate, 24th in breakaway run rate. Like, he's fine. That's not red flag level. That's okay. We can play with him. He's going to give you a little bit of something, and perhaps undervalued if he's going as almost running back 30. So yeah, give me a lot more Brian Robinson if this is how the market is going to be treating him, with maybe a more explosive offense. Sam Howell, as much as he was able to keep up in some of those shootout games, you just imagine it's Caleb Williams.
Yeah, the sky's the limit there. And again, to your point, if he's going to go as RB30, I'm going to smash it all day long. He's not that super flashy pick that you're like, oh, he's
you're going to show your friends. You're going to be like, hey guys, look, I drafted Brian Robinson. You know,
I got him in the 8th round. Aha. But No,
Robinson was 5th among all running backs in yards per route run, number 1 in yards per reception. He had an 8% target share, which was respectable, but the Washington can only go up 32nd in team run plays per game because their defense was so bad. You can imagine some more volume rushing wise and goal line wise coming his way in the future. Oh man, it's 3.5 minutes left in the Lions game versus the Rams. Sorry, I'm watching the game cast as well as we're talking.
I'm doing the same thing, so don't worry at all.
Oh man, this is exciting. I'm 25 minutes outside Detroit for those who are following along with me, but yeah, I think that this is a very exciting time for Lions fans, but also for the team that they're facing. Running back Kyren Williams comes into my rankings as running back 3 for the Rams. He did leave this game with a hand injury. I'm not too worried about that, obviously, long term, but there's been some chatter about, the Rams are going to bring in another back. They're going to bring in a guy to handle. I don't think so. Like in how Sean McVay handles these situations, like they may draft another rookie, but they're not looking to replace a Kyren Williams. He is a very valued part of this offense, extremely efficient, and he converts near the goal line. So you're not going to move away from a guy like that despite his very poor metrics, which is why he dropped to the 5th round. I was thinking Kyren Williams before pre-combine that he was going to be a 2nd or 3rd round pick in the NFL draft, but because of those bad combine metrics, he drops to the 5th round out of the University of Notre Dame, where he had rushed for over 900 yards and had, it was 30 or 40 receptions each season. But he was number 1 in running back snap share, 3 in rushing yards this year, 8th in true yards per carry, 13th in true yards per touch, 8th in the weighted tackles. Like this guy, it's give me some Kyren Williams in that LA Rams offense for next year. He's a borderline 1st round pick for me.
Yeah, I think he goes somewhere right around the 1-2 turn, and I think that is a pretty solid place for him to go. And I will say this, I am a lot higher on Kyren Williams than I am on Puka Nacua in that offense. And I know I might get a lot of slack for that, but I think a lot of Puka's value is going to be tied to Matthew Stafford and whether or not he comes back, whether or not he retires. And obviously there's a question every offseason with Sean McVay, whether or not he's going to go to TV, whether or not he wants to get out of coaching. I think if that happens, then I think we might see Matt Stafford go a different way, which in turn would lead to who knows who's going to be the quarterback. But I think Kyren Williams has a lot of standalone value that's not tied to Matt Stafford. And I think he was one of the most efficient running backs this year, as you just discussed. And I don't see him bringing in someone to take over that bell cow role.
Yeah, there were some other running backs for the Rams that had been sprinkled around. All it takes is a coach to have faith in you, and for the Rams to move on from Cam Akers, right? and that's all it took was a little bit of faith, hope.
They didn't even need to move on from him. He was an RB1 like the first couple weeks of the year too.
It was great. Yeah, ask now, ask Kyren Williams. We've got a couple more players on the list. If you guys aren't following Jake, make sure you're following him, Jake Brandt 16 on the X Machine. You can follow me on Twitter at FF Stalder. We've got the Fantasy Football Plus network. Jake is going to be bringing some great content for us this season here on the network. I'll be, of course, on the podcast like Ranking Summit. There's also going to be a podcast coming out called Overhead Projections, where we'll be discussing some projections. And of course, there's other Dynasty content that's coming out, best ball content that's coming out. I've got a lot of awesome creators and hungry creators like Jake coming onto the network who are going to be bringing the fire. And so I'm really excited for all the things that are happening here at the Fantasy Football Plus network. And Jake, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on and discussing, especially from our time as the fanalist and as a guest on the Best Ball podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It looks like the Lions just put away the Rams there. Amon-Ra catching an 11-yard first down under 2 minutes and no timeouts for the Rams. So looks like the Lions are going to get their first playoff win since Oh, Bart Starr was a quarterback over there for the Green Bay Packers, which was only 5 quarterbacks ago, it seems like. So,
Fewer than that. Fewer than
yeah, right.
it's been Love, it's been Rodgers, it's been Favre, and that's been my lifetime. That's the beautiful thing about being Packers fans. We don't have to remember. The poor Browns fans have duct tape upon duct tape where they have to etch in the names of the other quarterbacks that have
We had Seneca Wallace start a couple games when Aaron Rodgers got hurt. So,
Tim
we
Boyle
didn't
had
go
to
through
start a
that.
game, right? Oh man, yeah, yikes, Seneca Wallace. Yeah, Seneca Wallace also started some games for the Browns. So
And the
that's
Seahawks.
and the Seahawks. He's been everywhere. That's the
I can
Lions
guarantee you no one thought they were going to hear the name Seneca Wallace pop up on this podcast tonight. So.
No, they did not. They did not. Let's see here. I suppose one last topic that we can talk about is what are we going to do with this Pittsburgh backfield? I have Najee Harris at 27. I have Jalen Warren at 28. And I feel like I'm both too low on them and too high at the same time. Like, I think 27 and 20, and picking which one it is for 2024 is also going to be difficult because Najee Harris had the higher spike weeks, but Jalen Warren had the better efficiency. But he didn't get the volume and didn't get the goal line work. But before we get into Pittsburgh, the Lions have defeated the Rams, and tonight, according to Schefter, the Lions' first playoff win since defeating the Dallas Cowboys back 38-6 in 1991. 33 years ago, when Detroit's head coach was Wayne Fontes, and his running back was Barry Sanders. Until tonight, the Lions had lost 9 straight playoff games. Holy guacamole.
My God.
Woof.
They also get to host their next playoff game, too, with that Packers win earlier today. So, Detroit fans, you're welcome for the Packers taking care of Dallas. Now you guys get a home playoff game against either the Bucs or the Eagles. So, that should be a fun matchup no matter how you look at it next week.
Yeah, who do you have, Bucs or Eagles?
Ooh, I like the Bucs, honestly. I think they're playing a little bit better football. No AJ Brown tomorrow is going to be interesting, and I just think that Mike Evans and Chris Godwin are going to make a couple plays against that Eagles secondary.
Yeah, Devonta Smith is also dealing with injuries, and Dallas Goedert had injuries earlier in the season, and Jalen Hurts a dislocated finger. You mentioned the Eagles secondary being very vulnerable. This is Baker Mayfield, as much as we think that Jordan Love is playing recklessly, Baker Mayfield also playing recklessly, and Baker's playing for. I know we're supposed to talk about running backs on this pod, but can we just take a moment and say that Baker Mayfield got the Bucs to the playoffs, and if he wins, he'll have it'll be in the shadow of Tom Brady after almost being booted from the league. Last year, Carolina didn't want him. The Rams moved on from him this offseason. Like, it was Baker Mayfield. Like, if it wasn't Joe Flacco or DeMar Hamlin, like, Baker Mayfield, I think, has a cause for comeback player of the year. What do you think?
Oh, absolutely. What he's been able to do this year, and obviously having the weapons that he had, such as Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, and Rachaad White's emergence has been a huge factor for them as well. I think having those pieces in place and then being able to play under control as much as Baker Mayfield can play under control.
It's Baker.
To a degree, I think it's been huge. And I think you're right. If it wasn't for Flacco and Hamlin, then I think he 100% has a legitimate shot to be the comeback player of the year.
All right, we'll get back to the last question. Is the Pittsburgh Steelers running back situation, Jake? It's going to be a tough one to discern. I think that it's going to be interesting how the early ADPs treat both of them. My inclination is that Najee is still going to go ahead of Jalen Warren in drafts, but this year it's going to be a lot closer. How are you nuancing this Steelers backfield?
Yeah, I think it'll be wrong. I think Najee should be the guy that is taken first, but I do think Warren will end up being the guy that is taken first. And I think if you looked at what happened towards the end of the year, Warren started having fumbling problems in a couple of different games, which really affected that too. But I think, seeing two different offensive coordinators let Najee dominate the touches speaks volumes to me, especially once you have this new crew coming in and taking over the reins of the play calling and everything, and then still showing that loyalty to Najee. I think it proves that he is their guy there, and he is who they want to be the guy there. So I think Warren will be that kind of change of pace spellback, but I think Najee still handles the majority of the carries, and especially getting all the goal line work down there too.
All right, Jake, it's been an absolute pleasure. Make sure you guys are following Jake on Twitter at Jake Brandt 16. Follow me on Twitter at FF Stalder. It's been great talking these early running back rankings in this ranking summit. You can see the other ranking summit podcasts so far from Jake Fabian, myself, where we take a bird's eye view of the top 100 players. Today, Jake Brandt and I dove into the top 25 running back rankings, and we'll continue to do some positional rankings in the Ranking Summit podcast as we go on. But Jake, any other words before we sign off tonight?
I think you hit them all. Go Pack Go. I live about an hour and a half away from San Francisco, so it should be a fun week of talking crap to all the Niner fans that are out there, and hopefully J-Love and the Pack can bring home another dub.
All right, until next time, everyone, good luck in the fantasy football streets.